But before we get into it, let me allow our guests to introduce themselves. So we've got Kerry Jones, we've got Matt Larson-Dorr, and we've got Zipporah Musyoki. Kerry, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about why you're on this panel today?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for inviting me here today for a start. And I'm here, I think, really as one of the founding members of the Teachers Online Community ELT Footprint. And we've been up and running for over 2 years now. Last year, the community won an Elton's Award for Innovation for Teacher Resources. Basically, there are around 4,000 members, teachers, educators from all over the world, and we meet and network online to talk about initiatives, ideas, plans, projects, boost each other's motivation, and at the moment, with some colleagues from the ELT Footprint community, we are exploring ways of bridging the potential gap between environmental and sustainability literacy and linguistic frameworks. So trying to make it more accessible for language teachers in the classroom to integrate environmental issues, sustainability issues into the language classroom. Okay.
Brilliant. Yeah, look forward to hearing more about ELT Footprint as we go through the session today. Thanks, Kerry. Matt, on to you next.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, hi everyone, another Matt, sorry. And I'm here on behalf of WWF UK. I'm the education manager there. However, my remit is often global, has been in the past. I developed the education program for the Our Planet project, which was a Netflix series, but also a whole load of global online content to engage the whole population, ideally, but in my case, schools, with this idea of a balanced natural world. And also, even in my current UK focused role, I work as WWF's representative with the partnership that we have with the Climate Action Project, which I'm sure some of the schools represented on this call take part in each year. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to bring some useful insight.
Fantastic, thanks, Matt. And I think I'm right in saying that you attended COP26 a few weeks ago, is that right?
I did, and also thank you, Matt. I should have mentioned. I mentioned it in the talk I did at the beginning of the Global Schools Festival. I was responsible for convening organisations to engage schools around COP26 at the beginning of November, and we had thousands of schools around the world take part in our Forest of Promises that had a real presence in COP and also on social media during COP. So some of you may have taken part in that as well, in which case, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. And last but not least, we have Zipporah Musyoki, based in Kenya.
Yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, so I'm Zipporah Musyoki Webola. I work for WWF in Africa, in charge of Education for Sustainable Development Program. I've been working with education, environmental education, and education for sustainable development for many years, over 2 decades, in different capacities, working with schools, with teachers. And now at WWF, I'm coordinating the Education for Sustainable Development Program in Africa. And just linking to the climate education work, we've just closed mid this year, a 3-year project whereby we are working with schools in Africa, in pilot cities in Africa and Asia, on an advocacy program whereby we had youth advocating for the 1.5 degrees Celsius commitment, working with sustainable cities. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the exchange. Thank you.
Thanks, Zipporah. Great to have you here. So as you can see, loads of expertise on the panel. So let's dive into your questions. We've got questions that we collected from you during the week. And as we go through these, we're going to touch on issues relating to the climate crisis, relating to what teachers can do, what students can do, and so on. The first question, though, is starting at square one, I guess. Why is there a climate crisis, and is it too late to do something about it? Matt, can I put this one to you first?
Certainly, yes. So, yeah, obviously, this is probably a question which a lot of you have to deal with from your students. There's talk of the climate crisis, you know, on the global scale and in the media and so on. But of course, a lot of the time, it's assumed that everyone knows what that actually means. So I think it is really important to sometimes just remind ourselves that you can't be expected to be an expert in everything. And if this is something you're being asked, it is really useful to know where to go for this information. So, so in very simple terms, the climate crisis has been caused by simply humans, the way that we've lived on this planet in an unsustainable way over the last 100+ years. And it's an exponential curve. We've been doing more and more damage as our population increases and as we become more and more disconnected from nature. But the two really key things are, first of all, the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere because of our use of fossil fuels. And that is in itself fueled by governments subsidizing fossil fuel industry so that it remains profitable even when alternatives are being developed and so on. So there's a real political issue there. And then on the other side, the destruction of the natural world, because we need the planet to work as a natural system. We need it to work. We need biodiversity. It's the wildlife on our planet that has actually given us the stable climate that we now enjoy and have enjoyed for the last 1,000 years, and has enabled us as a species to become so successful and to develop such a complicated civilization. And we're deliberately taking that stability away by deforesting and damaging the oceans. And when those biomes, those natural ecosystems, are not healthy, they don't have all of the flourishing, varied life in them. They don't do the same things. So they don't keep the natural balance of our planet. They don't help absorb carbon. They don't release oxygen and purify the air and the water and so on, as they have done for all of these years that we've been enjoying a stable climate. So we need to reduce fossil fuel use and make sure that the planet can help us to restore stability.
And in terms of, I mean, we've reached a point now where it's becoming pretty urgent. Is it too late to do something about it? Or
it's a horrible question to ask, because some people would say that for some of the effects of climate change, it is now too late. And that's true. We will be dealing with we are already experiencing the impact of climate change, and there are already species going extinct because of climate change. There's already extreme weather events, uninhabitable places on this planet. So obviously, in that sense, it's too late to stop climate change being a problem. However, it's a bit like that saying, you know, the best time to plant the tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. The more we do and the quicker we do it now, the less the negative impact of climate change will be. And the real red line that we have, not just WWF, but across the conservation and environment community, is to try and keep the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees or less, and not let it go higher than that. We're already over 1 degree above the global average that we've seen, you know, for the last 1,000 years of stability, and we're already seeing all these problems. If we go over 1.5 degrees, there's a bit like I don't want to use the word tipping point, because tipping point means something very specific, but there's a lot of things that will happen that we can just prevent from being as serious if we keep it under 1.5 degrees. The example that's very stark is that coral reefs are already suffering because of rising temperatures, and therefore the rising temperature of the water in the ocean. We are almost certainly going to lose about 70 to 80% of our coral reefs. That's something we can't change now. However, if we keep it under 1.5 degrees, there will still be areas of coral reef that can survive, and then of course they will replenish as we hopefully bring that temperature down. If we go over 2 degrees, then there's no question we will lose all of our shallow water coral reefs. So it's a question of there being some or none, and that really does feel like a stark line when we're thinking about the planet that we're handing over to future generations. So that's why there's this urgency in the air, and that's why at places like COP26, where decision makers are being asked to commit and make really big commitments, the idea that our governments might still be subsidizing the use of fossil fuels, ensuring that fossil fuels are still used when that's what's causing this problem, when they could be not only not supporting their use, but actually actively working to stop them being used, is a sort of slightly heartbreaking thing for those that love the planet we live on.
Yeah, that's an understatement, Matt. I think slightly heartbreaking. Thank you very much. Let's. I'm going to jump to you, Kerry, to talk about the role of language teachers in all this. What can language teachers, what part can they play, and should they play a part, do you think?
Okay, I think language teachers have got a really special and a special position in all of this, that language is the form of communication, obviously above all else. And that's what we need to be doing, is communicating information about these issues and arming our students with the language that they need to be able to access the discourse community around climate crisis, biodiversity, environmental issues in general. The discourse is English, basically. English is the lingua franca of protest. It's like, it's now, it's become a cliche to say that English is the international language of protest, but it's also the international language of scientific information on the subject. And so by arming our students with the language that they need to be able to access that information, where we're doing something incredibly useful for our students, as well as for the whole fight against the climate crisis. So the more people who can be informed, who have access to the information, the better. So I think that first of all, as language teachers, we are helping students access, and then also we're helping students to discuss, to process, to advocate, all of these wonderful language verbs. We see them everywhere in environmental literacy frameworks, for example, which is a little bit of my pet subject area, but it's all about communicating and understanding, and any kind of understanding comes through language. So as language teachers, we also have almost a carte blanche about which topics we use in class. So long as we're teaching students to use the language, to understand the language, to communicate through the language, we have a lot of freedom about the topics that we take into the classroom. Yeah, so I'd say that much.
Thank you, Kerry. Lots of people agreeing with you in the chat box. So yeah, that's definitely resonating, I think, with teachers here. Zipporah, if I can come to you and talk about the issue of climate anxiety, because I think some of what Matt said alludes to the fact that you know, we're in a crisis, we're in an emergency, and inevitably that kind of makes people a bit nervous. Is this something that you come across in your work, and do you have any suggestions for how we can alleviate people's climate anxiety?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think I must say that climate anxiety is something that is there, and it's very evident, especially with the young people. We can also take note, for example, examples like the Fridays for Future, which have become, you know, something that the youth are doing all over the world, becoming because of the anxiety of what is going to happen to the world that, you know, that they're going to continue living in. So it is something that is there, and I do believe there is a way we can be able to address it, especially with young people. Even as we talk about climate change and looking at the different age groups, it's very important for them to have, even as they whatever they read in the media, it's good that they understand what are the causes of climate change and what can they do within their context. even when they're young and as they grow older. And I believe as they feel that they are contributing in one way or another, through their own action projects, through what they take at home, for promoting sustainable lifestyles, and also the advocacy work. I believe if they feel that they are being listened to also, they will be able, at least that anxiety would go away, noticing that their voice is being heard. And apart from their voice being heard, and realizing that they also can do something at individual level and mobilize other people in the world to do something at individual level, so that at least they can make a contribution. So I believe it's a two-way approach: the individual commitment that one makes, and also advocating for others out there, policymakers, industry, to actually address any concerns that are out there, changes in policies, and also if it's the private sector, production processes, having cleaner forms of production and so forth. So once the youth realize that they can also do something and that their voice is being heard, then I believe the levels of anxiety, would go down. But it is normal to be anxious. For example, if you're living, for example, if you are in a small island state and the sea levels are rising, you'll definitely would be worried. But it is important to always make sure that we consider the voices, especially of the young people. If they feel their voices and what they are asking for is being taken into consideration in policy making, then at least they can get a bit of comfort, and even as they continue with the advocacy work, and also as we continue urging governments to have increased commitments, for example, in their nationally determined contributions and all the other, and things like nature-based solutions and so forth. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zipporah. That makes a lot of sense. And it resonates with what Matt was saying about that project at COP. Matt, I don't know, do you feel that the voices of young people are being heard by policymakers?
So I think it would be great if there was a more formal way that was enabled and recognized. I think young people are making their voices heard, and that's fantastically empowering to see, for them to see that young people who they can aspire to are making that happen. I don't think that at the moment our leaders are, or most of our leaders are actively reaching out for that input from young people, and I think that's something which really does need to change. But I wanted to reinforce and agree with Zipporah on what she said, because I think there's a lot of focus when it comes to talking to young people about action on let's learn about this terrifying global issue, and then let's go away and do something that we feel we can do, and let's repurpose a plastic bottle, let's do a litter pick. Those things, and I don't think they are helpful in the grand scheme of things. First of all, because they don't equip young people to understand what those levers of change are, and we need young people to know what they are, because we need them to be able to and equipped to be the change makers of the future. And they're not going to change the climate crisis by litter picking. So why reinforce that at school? So what Zipporah was saying about actually encouraging them to be active citizens and to find a way to have their voices fed in, and then support them so that those voices are heard and they can see that they're being heard. That's really meaningful. And one of the things that I do if I'm talking about these issues in a school, even a primary school, I cover this. I'll sometimes use a row of dominoes, and I'll put one domino on one end of the table and another over here, and I'll say, well, okay, this is you, and this is let's say your prime minister or your president, and they, if they really pushed, they could make this massive change happen. Do you feel how could you influence them? And then we start thinking about who they can influence and where they can have influence. And it's about, talking to their parents, coming together as a school community and speaking with one voice, and therefore getting their MP, their local decision maker, on board, and actually listening to them and then feeding that back up. And as you start talking about all these different things that you can influence, and what then the knock-on effect of that is, you end up filling in for each of these. I put a domino in the gap until before you know it, you've bridged the gap, and then you tip the domino at one end and it goes all the way over, and the one that's at the far end falls over because you have influence. And we have a handy acronym, if you'll indulge me for a moment, for teachers specifically to think about when you're teaching these scary issues, how you can do it in a way that avoids causing too much anxiety, hopefully. So the acronym is HEAR, HEAR. So don't just talk about the climate crisis here. The H is for hope, because I know that it's a scary time, and we're on tenterhooks to see that enough is being done, but it isn't too late to have a positive impact and to take things back from the brink. So this idea of making sure that hope is included when you're teaching about the seriousness of the issues, that's really, really important. And one of the ways that we've tried to make sure that that's done in a way that isn't patronizing, in a way that doesn't just detract from the truth that you're teaching, is to focus on what the world could be like when we have solved these issues. So no matter how hard it's going to be, action is being taken, and they're being taken by people who have power and influence. So there's a limit to what we can do, but the change is going to happen one way or another. But let's think about the world that's going to be built on the other side, and let's think not just about what it's not going to have because of the things we have to change. Let's think about how we can make it a really positive world through our own actions, through our own innovations, and so on. So to have young people focused on the positive future that they can help shape is a much more empowering and anxiety reducing way of thinking about it, rather than how can we avert disaster. Like the idea that we're either going to have a world that's more or less like we have now, or a dystopia where everything's broken, is a really depressing way to think about it, because it's not going to be either of those things. Hopefully it's going to be a very different world where these problems can't arise again in the first place. And then the other ones, very briefly, E is for empathy, thinking about how different young people will be in different situations. Their parents will do different jobs, they'll have different cultural backgrounds. Think about how this information is going to affect them, or be understood by them differently, so that you can avoid causing anxiety or causing bullying between pupils and everything like that. A is for action, which we talked about. Just make sure you do give them the route to make sure that they realize they're not helpless in this. Even before voting age, they're not helpless. And then R is making it locally relevant, because hearing about global issues that you feel you have no control over is anxiety inducing, because you feel disconnected from it, you feel helpless. But there is locally relevant things that they can do, and locally relevant ways that they can see change happening or change being possible. And that's really important to hear.
Thanks, Matt. That's very interesting.
One last thing. Well, I spoke to a head mistress, a principal recently about this, and she suggested a fifth in the acronym, actually, which was P, to make it heart. Because she said one thing that's often overlooked is the P for time. Because if you don't spend time, if you just cover the information and then you don't have time, you've got to move on to another topic, you've left this, you haven't been able to cover all of these things in the depth that's needed to answer the questions that students might have, to help them to go through that processing that they might need to when they've heard something that's really worrying. So allowing enough time is the other thing.
Yeah, that's extremely useful. So we'll test you on that at the end, heart, and what those letters stand for. Thanks, Matt. So I was struck there by the emphasis that you put on citizenship, alongside, I guess, education on the science of what's happening. But that idea of educating students into how they can make a change, I think that's, for me, that's certainly a new thing. Kerry, when it comes to what teachers can do, and this was by far the most asked question that we had, what can teachers do? Have you got anything to add to what Matt has said there?
Okay, I think I'd like to go back just a little bit to this whole question of action. And it was kind of like, what kind of action students can take. And there was a little bit of diminishing of certain actions, which I think a lot of schools maybe do partake in. For example, the litter pick. And I think there is a way where that can also be worked into this whole idea of influence. So if something becomes big enough, so it's on the level of not just one or two people, not just one school, but a network of schools coming together, then it can make the news. And then it can become something which does awaken awareness or gives a voice to the young people who are taking part in that particular project, for example. So I think even a project that starts really small can grow to be really impressive. I know of one in Spain, for example, where it was two teachers over a cup of coffee started thinking about doing beach cleanups with their language school. And it spread across the whole of the north coast of Spain until tens of thousands of students were involved. And it became like this national flagship, and they won a European award for sustainability, and it was called the Language of the Sea, this particular project, which was also integrated into teaching materials that the teachers were using in class with the students in order to then get them to involve their schools, so not just their language schools, but their schools, their families, their friends, and it became this huge, big community-based project. So I think that even starting from the smallest seed, something that might seem like minimal action can be seen to be one drop in the ocean of larger action. And any kind of action, any kind of project has got to be positive if it then gets if the students get to see how it fits into the bigger picture. So so I'd like to say that whatever you're doing with your students, if you can make it, if they feel proud of it, if it's an achievement, let's say there's a bit of common ground. I'm looking out my window now and I can see one which would desperately needs cleaning up every week. And if a school were to do it and then catalogue the kind of litter that they're picking up, then this isn't about okay, so litter is, as it were, the wrong enemy, but it isn't that. It's to do with seeing how consumption is a problem, how people throw stuff away, how we don't value natural places, we don't look after our own local ecosystems and so on. So it's that piece of litter in itself is one tiny thing. But if we can use it to help our students to understand, first of all, their own local ecosystems, their own, like to have some pride and love for the interconnectedness of life on their front doorstep, as it were. And then from there, I think it's easier to build a larger awareness. So again, it's kind of starting small and making sure that it gets put into the bigger picture. So what can teachers do? I think what we can do, first of all, is have a look around, and this is the R from Matt's here. Locally, what's relevant? What are the issues that your students are going to be able to identify with most easily? So, for example, I live in a seaside town, so it does make sense to look a little bit at beach cleanups, to look at the kind of rubbish that's being washed up on the beach every day. It also, conservation programs, there's this very cute little plover bird that nests in the dunes behind our beach every summer, and very stupidly, they nest on the, they lay their eggs on the sand, they look like pebbles and people walk on them. So there was a local conservation project that a local school got involved in, and basically it just started off with teaching kids about these birds and what they do, and this it fits in so closely with CLIL in the classroom. And but then they got involved with a conservation project, and they saw that the number of birds is actually going up. So this bird, which was in danger of extinction, is now being protected. But also what I loved was this idea of the umbrella species, kind of like the, you know, the poster boy little plover bird. The fact that this bird was being protected meant that the whole dune ecosystem was being protected as well. And so the kids suddenly became really informed about this, what was like a small part of the world that they live in, but suddenly there was a kind of a local pride in that. So there's a love for nature, a love for this understanding of how everything works. And what did they do? Well, they made they helped make the posters that were put up in the dunes to dissuade the tourists from walking on the dunes. I almost said terrorists instead of tourists. And some of those were in English, because the tourists obviously might not understand I'm in Spain, so they might not have understood signs in Spanish. So these primary school children were putting together signs in English to protect the plover on their dunes. So that's another example of how a classroom-based lesson in biology became a kind of action that the kids could really feel like they were doing something positive. And even if it was a tiny change and it's just one little corner of the world, then it opens their eyes to understanding how that works in other places too. So start local, I think. Find out what your kids or your adult students or your university students might be passionate about, and bring that into the classroom.
Thanks, Kerry. Just to touch on what you mentioned there about CLIL, it sounds as though as a teaching approach that has a lot of relevance to this idea of fighting the climate crisis, do you think?
Yes, I think, I mean, it's such a perfect subject that's extracurricular in so many different ways, cross-curricular in so many different ways, that it can tick a lot of CLIL boxes as well. So it's learning about something through English. So learning English by learning about the environment, it's perfect, I think.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Zipporah, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of what teachers can do, or in terms of what can be done at the level of a whole school?
Yes, thank you very much. And just to build on to what Sari has been talking about, as teachers, it's very important to contextualize your curriculum. If, for example, if you're working in a city and you're thinking, how can we address climate change? You could be looking at issues to do with pollution, most likely, and issues of transport. If you are, for example, in a rural school, it could be maybe you're dealing with an issue of, for example, deforestation. So the actions the students could take could be like planting trees, or even in cities, greening cities, and addressing things like pollution, and seeing what they can do, cleanups, recycling projects, and so forth. And also conserving energy. For example, you'd find in rural areas, for example, in the context of Africa, you find that a lot of boarding schools use a lot of firewood for cooking. So one of the mitigation mechanisms to avoid a lot of deforestation, especially lots of suppliers taking wood to schools, is schools have developed in some regions, energy saving stoves, those ones that can actually use, for example, less firewood, so that at least they reduce on deforestation, and and so forth. Now, when it comes to the school, the whole school approach, when you talk about environment, climate, education, it is not for the science teacher. It's not even, it's looking how can we mainstream climate change education across the entire school curriculum. So I would encourage teachers, for example, if in your school, you can even decide to have a weekend workshop and decide how are we going to mainstream this topic, for example, on climate, just one example, we are talking about climate change today. How can we mainstream climate change education in our curriculum? So if it is English, children, even if it's the young children, they can write a composition, on things like planting more trees and so forth. Mathematics, you can see how can we integrate the issue of climate into our mathematic questions, teaching and learning, and so forth. So a whole school approach is very important in terms of having in the curriculum teaching and learning, but it's also good to look at the school builds. We find, for example, in my context in Africa, a lot of public schools might not be really well managed. You might find that they have soil all over. So one of the things would be to green schools, plant trees, you know, and that would also help to mitigate climate and take the same, replicate the same behavior back home. So, for example, when we talk about the whole school approach, we want to make sure that the schools do not become islands of themselves, you know, or ivory towers in a community. We want whatever is done in the school, it goes to the community. So like in some schools we worked with, you'd find that you go to the schools and find that each class has a tree nursery. So when you talk to the children, they'll tell you, I also have some tree nurseries at home, and I've sold, like for example, in the poor schools, they tell you I've sold some of those seedlings to the local community, and maybe I've used that money to, you know, to help buy my school uniform and so forth. So it's looking at different levels of society and see what can be done just in terms of environmental conservation and addressing matters to do with climate change. So climate is something that needs to be mainstreamed in the entire school curriculum. It's not just for maybe the science teachers and all that. And I would challenge subject language teachers, for example, English, to work together and see how can we mainstream climate change education into our teaching and learning for the different levels of the children when you're teaching the different levels, be it the lower grade kids or the higher grade children. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Zipporah. It's really striking, I think, in all of your answers about the extent to which you're talking about schools engaging with their communities, whether it's the beach project or the tree nurseries or dealing with local citizenship. That seems to be a really key theme. Matt, thanks for posting that message in the chat. I wonder if you just want to round up this question for people that didn't have a chance to read that.
Oh, well, sure. It was really just a big thumbs up to what Kerry was saying about the role of small actions and getting young people to be active and visible, even if the projects are local in scale. Because I 100% agree, and I certainly wasn't trying to suggest that actions like litter picks or beach cleans are not valuable. What was really important, and Kerry said this very clearly, is just helping students to understand how that does fit into the system. So there's not this sense of a real disconnect between the action that they're being encouraged to do at home or at school and the problem they've learned about, because students aren't stupid and they can pick up on that, and that can actually be our insight shows that has in the past been a cause of anxiety. Where some of the young people that we now see taking that platform that they've created for themselves in the youth movements, they've had this kind of they've asked questions about the climate crisis, or they've learned about some of these issues at school, and then the kinds of things that they're encouraged to do or that the school organises are things which they can't see the link between them doing that and there being a change. So it feels like they're being bobbed off, but of course, there are various reasons why those projects are hugely valuable. First of all, because young people can learn that doing something can lead to a positive impact, and we really support those kind of local biodiversity projects where you just make some changes, as Zipporah was saying, you make some changes in your school grounds, and you actually see more wildlife being able to flourish there, or you do these kinds of litter picks, and you end up with people being more conscious and being more friendly to their local environment and so on. And those kinds of things are really important to give students the encouragement that it's worth, using your voice and using your actions and actually making an effort. And also at a school level, and this picks up a bit on what Zipporah was saying, whatever actions you can take right now, if you start taking those actions, then you start to build in a culture of thinking about sustainability and potential climate action. And as soon as that culture starts to grow, everything else becomes easier. More people are willing to get involved or understand what you're trying to do if you do go for a more ambitious project. And so that starting small is actually an absolutely vital part of the methodology we suggest to schools. So I think I made a different point and implied something I didn't mean. So I'm glad that got picked up on.
Thanks, Matt.
Sorry, I wasn't picking up on you at all, but recently I was at a conference where the shortcut, the easy shortcut being used all the time was bamboo toothbrushes, and they were being, sort of, everyone was, oh, it's not enough to use a bamboo toothbrush and like that. And I thought, yeah, fine, but also the person who does use a bamboo toothbrush and doesn't use a plastic bag and is thinking about reducing the meat they eat, etc., doing all of the small personal actions, is more likely to take a larger action than the people who don't do any of those small things. So it's not, I mean, okay, so there's someone who does that and then that's it, I've done my bit, I don't need to do any more. That kind of, either complacency or complete hopelessness that there is nothing else that can be done. Yes, that's a problem. But it is, if you look at the people who are taking real action that makes a difference, they probably have a bamboo toothbrush. So it's kind of, the small is important as well. But as you say, Matt, it's that thing of building on those small building blocks and making them bigger.
Absolutely, and I think there's a uniqueness, there's a unique opportunity, and this play again, Zipporah picked up on this as well, with schools. So young people at schools are part of a community, so the schools can play this convening role and this leadership role to give something which lots of people can get behind and do together. And of course, the inevitable result of that is that you can have so much more impact and so much more visibility and reach and so on than one individual can do without working very hard to get that same number of people around them. So schools can actually, if they do this whole school approach and they think beyond the classroom, they can inspire young people far more than young people are likely to be inspired by the results of the actions they might take outside school on their own, because that can be quite a disheartening experience for students. Whereas at schools, a school project or an invitation to a local decision maker to come and speak to students is likely to be accepted. And all of these things become possible, and the scale of impact of all the students doing something together is so inspiring and impactful that it can kind of give that kind of active citizenship a bit of a shot in the arm.
Fantastic. We don't have too much time left, but I do want to focus on the question of materials and teaching resources. So Kerry, this is a topic close to your heart because you're a materials writer and author for Cambridge. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how climate topics fit into the course books that you've worked on, but also what ELT Footprint is doing in terms of materials for teachers that they can use in the classroom.
Okay, so to start with, I think that we're seeing a slow growth in integrating the environmental issues rather than having the unit on the environment, which would bore students and just try to, force facts down their throats that they really weren't that interested in. Or you've got the typical cliche of the polar bear and really relating it to students' lives or working with teaching for hope or action or anything. But what has happened, I think, is that now because the emergency has become so much more heightened, we know this is the issue of the time, and this is trickling down into, and I'm sorry that this is has the importance it does, but exams. So high stakes exams are now including questions where the texts are about environmental issues. They're expecting that students are able to communicate using the lexis and the structures required to talk about environmental issues. There isn't one high stakes exam from the last couple of years that I've looked at in the main suite that didn't have at least one item which included something about environmental issues. So it's there. So we've got this, if it's there in the exams, it's a wonderful excuse, if not good reason, for it to be in the teaching materials as well, and for all teachers in all classrooms to actually be integrating that into their language classrooms. So we are seeing course books that are integrating the subject rather than paying lip service to it, I think. And this is a positive step. It's happening slowly. And it isn't happening as quickly as it needs to. It isn't happening as quickly as action and awareness is, I don't think, but at least it is supporting teachers in being able to at least have a springboard. There's something there in the materials that you can start from and then take it in the direction you want to take it. ELT footprint. One of the things we have is on our website, so that's eltfootprint.org. We have a materials tab where we collect free teaching resources. These have either been written and shared by members of the community, and we have a lot of authors in the community. There are a lot of professional content writers who are sharing free lessons, but also links to free resources that already exist, because there's a lot out there, but sometimes that's the problem. It's really difficult to find what's right for you. So these are all lessons that have in some way been recommended by members of the community. Another thing that ELT Footprint does is it sponsors courses for teachers to write their own materials, or promotes, let's say, not rather than sponsors. So the British Council had a course recently for teaching for the planet. There's another course, language teaching for the planet, by Owen Llewellyn and Ben Crompton, which is it's a great, really creative, hands-on, practical course that helps teachers see how they can target a particular competence, a particular environmental competence, and make that into a language lesson. So by joining our community, this is where the big plug comes in. You can follow us on Twitter, ELT Footprint on Twitter. You can come to our website, or you join us on Facebook, and ask a question, and you'll find that there are so many people who want to answer it, because the community is just full of really enthusiastic teachers who want to share and help, and lots of people with questions too. So if you're looking for something specific, one of the things you can do is ask the community. I'm going to put the website in the chat, if that's okay.
Please do. Thanks, Kerry. And where can teachers find that course that you mentioned?
So hold on a second. I'm just the language for the planet. You should be able to just Google that, language for the planet, but I'll have a look now. I can share that.
Thanks very much. While you have a look, I'm going to ask Zipporah. Yeah. Zipporah, do you have any resources, or does WWF have any resources for teachers or for schools that they can use for this?
Yes, I'll be happy to share. When we were winding up the cities project for schools, working on the 1.5 degrees Celsius commitment, pushing cities to put in trajectories that would, roadmaps that would ensure that they lower they have commitments that make their cities work towards the 1.5 degrees. One of the exit strategies we did was to develop some booklets for youth and also for teachers. So I'm happy to share those ones, and maybe there is a way you can make them available. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure we can put links to that in the email that we send out next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we are almost at the end, but we do have a couple of questions that people have asked while we've been talking. So let's just deal with these quickly. Matt, I'm going to ask you this one. How can I collaborate with the UN on a personal level to combat climate change?
Oh, I don't know, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
That's a tough one. Maybe it relates though to what you were saying about citizenship and your local representative. And
yeah, I think
locally.
Yeah, it's understanding that those cogs of change and how they, a small cog turns a larger cog and so on. I think we should never give up on our, using our voices to make sure that, there's visibility of just how many people are concerned about, what's happening and what they're asking for, because, you need that to just change the direction of decision making at that international and, of course, national level.
Thanks, Matt. Kerry, we've got a question from Farouz. Is there any relevance between Bloom's taxonomy and its application to combating climate change?
It's an interesting question. Okay, I think if I can kind of just quickly, Bloom's taxonomy, so lower thinking skills and higher thinking skills. So I think, yes, of course, any kind of teaching could be predicated on that. But I think another thing which is really important for me is fostering critical thinking, teaching students how to read and identify bias, teaching students how to identify misinformation. For example, a lesson that I've been working on recently and sharing a lot is on greenwashing. What is greenwashing? Looking for examples of greenwashing, explaining why that's an example of greenwashing, creating what I'm calling the rogues gallery of greenwashers, so that students get brownie points for coming into class with having hunted down yet another culprit, as it were. So I think this is something, it's like another member of ELT Footprint, Nergis Khan, has talked about this at conferences, is the importance of helping students ask questions and look for the answers for their questions. So it's not us telling them what to think, but it's us helping them to find the answers to the questions that they want to ask. And so I think this ties in really, really well with Bloom's taxonomy and the whole 4 C's, 21st century skills. Critical thinking is there in the middle of it all, and that's what we need to help our students to do, is to see beyond the misinformation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kerry. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. Zipporah, can I just ask you before we finish, what would be your kind of one parting thought that you'd like teachers to take away from today's talk?
Yeah, so my parting shot to the teachers on this platform is that please take ownership of the climate change issue and see how best you can integrate it in your school, in your teaching and learning, in your school environment. What can you do to address climate change using the whole school approach and collaborating with the rest of the school community, the teachers, and even the non-teaching staff, the Parents Teachers Association? How can you all come together and work around towards strengthening climate change education, both in the curriculum, in the school, and even in the surrounding community, and also helping to promote the youth voice out there, especially with the policymakers, things like climate councils. I would be happy if you can be able to organize an annual climate council where the students are able, for example, to have the policymakers, for example, in those cities come in and listen to the visions of youth on what they would want, for example, their future to look like, their city to look like, their municipality to look like, and what can the city planners or the people who work in that region do. So mine is, please take action on it. It's for all of us. Thank you.
That's a great message. Thanks, Zipporah. Matt, your parting thoughts?
Actually, my normal closing remarks were covered by Kerry really eloquently there, which is just to make sure that whatever you have the time and the opportunity to cover with your students, you introduce it and you foster, you help them to criticize or to look critically at all the information that they can see within and outside school, and to understand what terms really mean. And the example I normally give is sustainability, because we already have a fantastic framework for looking at sustainability in school, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, which already connects the dots between the things we need to do to save our planet from unsustainable exploitation, along with poverty and education and all the other social issues that are connected to it and also need to be addressed at the same time for a positive future. But sustainability, look at how it's used by some companies. They use it as if it's the same as green, which has already lost its meaning. And they talk about becoming more sustainable or whatever. sustainability, something is either sustainable, it can be carried on forever, or it isn't. And if students can understand that, understand what it means, then you don't need to teach them about every single issue. They can go and they can apply that understanding and make their own judgments about things and come up with their own solutions to things you haven't had to teach, because they've got the skills and the values and the understanding to be able to judge for themselves and see the truth in things. So yeah, critical thinking. And also, lastly, just go on the journey with them. Don't be scared by the complexity of these issues and feel that you're not qualified to teach, because you don't need to be an expert in every single issue. It's a constantly changing and evolving science. There's new science and new terms coming in all the time. So if we waited till we had a handle on absolutely everything, we'd never end up playing a role as teacher. So be a facilitator of learning, and go on the journey with them, and hold your hands up where there's something that you can't answer then and there, and then work with them to find what that answer might be, or to explore that issue and topic with them. And then they'll feel they're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, being able to model learning in that way is a great skill for any teacher. Thanks, Matt. Kerry, anything for you to add just before we finish?
Yes, I think that something that had an influence on me was seeing a talk by an Australian academic called Will Grant, and he talks about the 4 levels of influence in action on any issue, but specifically on the climate crisis. So the first level is individual. The second is with your family. The third is looking at what networks you're part of and who you can influence. And I think as teachers, we don't realize how wide our networks are, because by influencing our students, then we are influencing the networks of those students, but also we can influence within the school. And then we've already talked about how the school influences across the community. So the place where you're most influential is what Will Grant calls stage 3, which is within your professional position. You look and you see what your networks are, who you can influence, who you do know, who you can get in touch with, and you use that as much as you can. Level 4, by the way, is on the street, demonstrating, making political noise, and that's really important as well. But your influence is greatest at level 3, as a teacher, as an educator, as a school management, anywhere within education. That is where your influence is going to be greatest. So wield it, use it, make the most of your position to reach as many people as you can, and get as many people involved as possible.
That's a great call to action to end on. Thanks very much, Kerry. We have run out of time, but thank you all of you for joining us for this discussion. Thank you to Kerry, to Matt, and to Zipporah for all of their insights this evening. And that's the end of the Global Schools Festival for this year. So thanks very much if you've been joining us throughout the week. We've had over 30 sessions, thousands of attendees, and it's been fantastic. So I hope it's been productive for you too.